Welcome to Uniquely Female Troubles. My name is Leslie Wells. Today we're going to talk about vaginismus. And that is something that I mentioned in my video about being born with a abnormal hymen. I was born with a vaginal, congenitally abnormal vagina because I had a cribriform hymen, which I talked about that in detail on another video. And I'll put a link to that video in the description of this video. But then after I had the operation to remove the hymen, had the hymenectomy, I found out I still experience a lot of pain with sex, which there's a medical term for that. It's dyspareunia. That means painful intercourse for women. And that has like 1,000,001 reasons, which I'm going to make a separate video about dyspareunia. But this video is about vaginismus. And what vaginismus is it's an involuntary contraction of the vaginal muscles whenever you are going to experience penetration, whether it's a penis, whether it's a speculum, whether it's a tampon, anything. I have never used a tampon in my entire life, ever. And everybody says they're so much better than pads. Well, I have no idea about that because I never used one. And so there are two kinds. There's primary and there's secondary. Primary means that you have never had penetration, and the first time you try to do that, you find out, that you're in a lot of pain. And then secondary vaginismus is when you've been able to have intercourse. Often people with that have had kids. And for some reason, intercourse becomes associated with pain. Sometimes it's from the trauma of childbirth. And it can be for other reasons. One reason that can cause it is perimenopause and menopause, because with the lack of estrogen, sometimes women experience, you have a lot less lubrication, and sometimes women experience so much dryness that they actually get micro tears, which sounds very painful, when they have intercourse. So then they can develop vaginismus. And it's like when you're anticipating a very high level of pain associated with penetration, that can cause vaginismus. And these muscle contractions are completely involuntary, which means you don't make them happen, and it also means that you can't make them stop. So you can't just say, I'm not going to let my muscles contract, because you are not making them contract, and you have no way of making them not contract. There's also two other elements of vaginismus. One is called selective vaginismus. That means that with certain partners, you have it, and with other partners, you don't. And that's pretty interesting. I didn't even know that was a thing. But non-selective means that you always have it every time anything tries to penetrate. So a lot of things can cause it. And the whole thing is, if penetration becomes linked in your mind with something very, very negative, whether it's physical pain, which that can be caused from so many different things. In my case, I was born with a hymen that prevented intercourse, but through a bunch of circumstances that came together, my husband didn't allow me to go to the doctor for 6 months. And he kept insisting that we so-called try to do it. And because of the circumstance of us being in a cult, they gave him all that power over me. I went along with that for 6 months until I couldn't take it anymore. But that's in the other video that I'll link below. But like, if you've been like SA'd, that could very easily cause vaginismus. I mean, why wouldn't it? And especially if it's childhood SA, anything that can cause physical pain like endometriosis, vaginitis, anything can cause it. And then a lot of times it's the fear of the pain. Like, so many times our parents, which this didn't happen to me. I feel like we had a very healthy attitude towards sex in my home. I mean, it wasn't something that was was like focused on constantly, but in some families it is. And like if you get the idea from your mom that sex hurts or that sex is disgusting, if you get that idea from anywhere and it really gets deep down inside of you, it can cause vaginismus. And I don't know this, there hasn't been any studies, but I am positive that there is a higher rate of vaginismus among girls that are raised in a purity culture than girls that are not. And to tell you a little bit about purity culture, that is putting such a huge emphasis on being a virgin when you're married, which personally I think that's a good idea. But what they do to try to enforce that is a very, very bad idea. And it's very, very destructive. And the biggest thing is they just like pound it into your head at church, at home. And if you go to a private school, so a lot of kids go to a school ran by their church. So with all that, and they're telling you sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, you know, and they have these disgusting analogies like they'll take a piece of gum. The speaker will be chewing a piece of gum, and then he'll say, hey, anybody want some gum? And when some people say, yeah, I want some gum, then they take the gum out of their mouth. It's here, you can have it. That's what they think of a woman, a girl, really, that has had sex. It's like, nobody wants that. Yuck. Or they'll even take a cupcake and like lick the frosting off of it. It's really, I never experienced this, and I'm really grateful that I didn't. To think, I mean, it's like, or they even take a rubber band and they stretch it and stretch it and stretch it till it practically breaks. I mean, it's no good anymore. Basically, they're letting you know that if you've had sex, that you're no good anymore. And they say that you have to save your virginity as a gift to give your future husband. So when you're like 12 years old, they're telling you that. And, you know, hopefully you're not going to get married for at least about 10 more years, or, you know, maybe a little less, but it's just terrible. It's so messed up that a woman's value is all tied up in whether or not she has had sex or not. And when they pound that into your head and it's this constant indoctrination, then deep down in your unconscious, you could get the idea, you know, sex is bad. And just because you have a wedding day and put on a white dress and have a party and have a ceremony, go off on your honeymoon, and you now have permission to have sex, we don't have a light switch inside our head, unfortunately. So no matter how bad you consciously want to have sex with your husband, after living through all those times of purity culture, your body might say no. And that will cause a whole host of problems. And one thing I do want to say is that if you are having intercourse and it is painful, don't do it. Don't do it. Because you can cause yourself unknowingly, just like I did, to get vaginismus. And once you have vaginismus, it is not easy to get rid of, and it can really mess up your life. So I really, really, really want to emphasize that. Tell your daughters, tell your nieces, tell your grandkids, tell every young girl in the planet that you ever encounter, which I'm exaggerating, obviously. Don't have intercourse if it hurts. If it hurts, something's wrong. It's not supposed to hurt. And even the first time you do it, it might hurt a little bit. It's not supposed to hurt a lot. Like, on a scale of 1 to 1,000, the first time I had intercourse would have definitely been 1,000. And I was told, oh yeah, it always hurts girls the first few times. Well, no, it does not always hurt girls where they're crying and screaming and trying to get away from the guy. That's not normal. Don't let anybody tell you it is. And please don't put your sexual health, this is mental health too, on the line by forcing yourself to have intercourse when it hurts. Go to the doctor, find out what is going on. Maybe it's just a matter of needing more lubrication. It could be something really simple like that, and I really hope it is. So, how common is vaginismus? In the general population of women, they think between about 1 and 2% of women have vaginismus. And as far as the women that go to like a sexual dysfunction clinic or anywhere that specializes in sexual dysfunction, at least half the women have vaginismus. And, this has been around forever, of course, because our minds have been around forever. But it was first described in medical literature in 1802. And the term vaginismus was coined by a doctor named James Marion Sims in 1866. And this is a quote that he said about women that have vaginismus. It will produce such agony as to cause the patient to shriek out, complaining at the same time that the pain is that of thrusting a sharp knife into the sensitive part. And that is what it feels like. It really hurts. And, obviously something's wrong. Please don't try to push through that, because if you do, you're just going to make it worse. If you already have vaginismus and you are going to try to just do it anyway, grit your teeth, it can happen. The guy can force himself in. There's no actual physical barrier except for your contracted muscles. You're going to be hurting and you're not going to like it. And it's just really bad. So it's considered an anxiety response because you have experienced pain, physical pain, emotional pain. It's an anxiety response. So one thing that's an issue is that if marriages are not consummated, they can be annulled. So you have a legal ceremony, you have a marriage license. The last step to make it kind of like a true marriage is to consummate the marriage. It's kind of like not considered a real marriage unless it's consummated. And in a lot of states, that is legal. And especially if there is a physical reason why the marriage cannot be consummated. So that's something to think about. Unfortunately, it's just such a mess, really it is. And I want to talk about the treatments first. And the main 3 things they do to treat it is, for one, go to therapy. They might put you on an antidepressant to help with all the anxiety and guilt and stuff. And then the other thing is dilators. And what those are small, they're in a graduated size. They start out very small and then they work their way up. There's a whole set of them. And the last one is the size of a normal penis. And what you do is you take the littlest one and you put it inside of you several times a day until that's like no big deal, fine. Then you go to the next size and the next size, next size, next size. And I've seen different documentation about how successful that is. Some people say it's pretty successful. I've heard other things that I've read say it's not very successful at all. But it's definitely worth a try. I never did that, unfortunately. And then there's a brand new therapy. I don't know how new it is now, but something new that definitely wasn't around when I was dealing with this. And that is Botox, which is kind of funny. But Botox, the reason Botox makes you not have wrinkles, like if I go like that, I have these big 2 lines right here all of a sudden. Well, why? It's because I'm using my muscles. I go like that with my muscles, or I go like that. So if I had a Botox injection in my forehead, I would no longer be capable of doing this because my muscles would be, paralyzed. Well, what if they're giving women Botox injections into their vagina? That way the muscles cannot contract. And I think that is great. And I hope that happens more and more and more, and that they come up with other things that help it. Now I want to talk about kind of like what it feels like to have vaginismus. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience. So, like I told you, I had a hymenectomy, and then the doctor cleared me for sex, and it still hurt really bad. It did not hurt as bad as it did when I basically had a castle wall inside of me that he was trying to batter down with his battering ram. But it hurt really bad. And I had no idea why. And I had such a terrible experience with that gynecologist that I never went back to him. My big mistake was not going to a different gynecologist and trying to find out what was going on with me. I didn't do that. I was really young. I was like, I was 20. I think I was 20. I just, yeah, I didn't handle it properly. So it was very, very painful to have intercourse. And then, so I just lived like that for a really long time, at least 10 years, more than 10 years. And one day I was in a bookstore and I ran across this book. It's called When a Woman's Body Says No to Sex. And it's Vaginismus. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that word. It's by an author named Linda Valens. And it's on Amazon. I'm going to put a link in it in the description to Amazon. And I'm also going to put some links to books that I haven't read, newer books. And so that was when I first found out what was actually wrong with me. I knew right away that that was what was happening to me. So it was great to have an explanation, but it didn't fix the problem, unfortunately. And then think about being married and not wanting to have intercourse. For one thing, that's the only kind of sex that gets you pregnant. And I wanted to have a baby really bad. I wanted a baby so bad. It's really hard to describe how bad I wanted to have a baby. And I knew I wasn't going to have one, between the fact that my periods were just all over the place. They were completely irregular. And the fact that we were almost never having intercourse. So that's one of the things that goes along with vaginismus. It makes it very difficult to have a baby. I was really blessed because I did get pregnant. And then I had a miscarriage, unfortunately, which actually but that pregnancy regulated my system. And I was tracking everything. And then I did get pregnant 3 months later with the baby that I did have, my daughter, who she's 32 now. And one of the big things that goes along with vaginismus is a lot of guilt. Because you know that your husband wants to have intercourse and you don't. And if you have a decent husband who doesn't want to hurt you, he's gonna, it's like, even though he's willing to make the sacrifice of maybe not having that kind of sex, but at the same time, you feel guilty. Most women feel really guilty if they're not having sex with their husbands, even though their husbands don't want to put them through that. And that you live with a lot of guilt. And if you have an insensitive husband, he can be very mean about it. And I mean, that's a really good test of what kind of husband you have. It's definitely nothing anybody would volunteer for. But if that's the situation and he's mean to you about it, he's selfish, wants to do it anyway, and he's calling you frigid, that tells you he's not a very good husband. And I've heard of guys that are really great about it, and they're just willing to do whatever they have to do or not do whatever they have to not do because they love their wives. I was called frigid quite often, and I believed it. I knew I didn't like sex, and we live in this culture that is so sex saturated. It's like you can't look anywhere without seeing sex. And one of the most valued qualities in this culture is to be sexually desirable, hot, and even like I was in a cult that did not even want you to think that way. But yeah, I was also in a culture that does want you to think that way. And the cult was actually a lot more powerful in my life. I never worried about like, oh, I'm not hot, I'm not sexy looking, which I wasn't. But that wasn't really a thing. But what was a thing is I was supposed to want to have sex with my husband. That was one of my main important things that I had to do as a wife. But how can you force yourself to want to do something that hurts that bad? You can't. You might force yourself to do it, which is a really bad idea, but you can't force yourself to like it. And if you don't like it, then you get called frigid. And that is like one of the worst insults because you're some kind of freak of nature. I felt like a freak of nature because it seemed like the whole world was telling me that sex is like the best thing in the whole wide world. And, I hated sex. And I felt really bad about myself for hating sex. But after I read this book, it was kind of like a light bulb moment. It was like, duh, does anybody like pain this much? This kind of pain? I don't think many people do. I think it's really normal to not want to do something that hurts that bad. So I started feeling not so much like a freak, but I still felt very inadequate. And I think it's really hard to not enjoy sex at all and to not feel inadequate about that. I really do. And then if you want to have a baby, you want to have a good marriage, it messes up your life. That's why I keep saying don't force yourself to have sex if it's hurting, because you don't want to get this. So as far as solutions go, go to a doctor, talk to a therapist. I mean, the first step would be to go to a gynecologist. And they know about vaginismus. They know all about it. They've all had patients that have it. And they can send you to somebody like a specialist who, a gynecologist specializes in sexual problems, and just go from there. Do your best to try to, work on this. Don't just ignore it, which is what I tried to do. And most problems don't get better from ignoring. Most problems get worse, which is something I'm still working on because I happen to have a bad problem of wanting to just ignore things still. And that really doesn't make things better. So, and then also, you can get those dilators on Amazon. I don't know if it's even a good idea to try that without professional, help and guidance. But like if you don't have insurance and you absolutely cannot afford to go to a doctor, which maybe you could go to a doctor at a health department. I don't know your situation, but the fact is that this is a medical condition, and it has a very negative impact on your quality of life, your husband's quality of life, and you just feel like a total weirdo, and it's rotten. I'm telling you. So I really hope you guys don't have this, but if anybody does, there's hope. There's Botox, there's doctors, there's sex therapists, there's all kinds of people that know what they're doing and they're ready to help you. I'm going to put some links to some other channels that I have seen on YouTube that have to do with people that had to have hymenectomies and people that have had vaginismus. And, I'm not the only person on YouTube talking about this. So, and like I said, I'm going to put some links to some books on Amazon. And I really appreciate you watching this video. And I would love it if you would leave me a comment. Tell me about your experience. I'm also going to post a poll. This will be my 4th poll, and I would love it if you guys would go on there under the posts in the channel. I'm putting a poll up every week asking a question. And I've gotten a little bit of response, but I would love to get more. I would love to hear from you. And I would love to hear your comments because it's kind of like speaking into a void, making a video and then not getting almost any comments back. I would love to turn this from a monologue to a dialogue. That's really my goal, is to have a dialogue with you guys. And please subscribe to my channel and please give it a thumbs up. And the reason every YouTube person says that is because the more thumbs up and the more subscribers and the more people who watch the video and comment, the more YouTube's algorithm puts our videos in front of more people. And so that's always the goal. So I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. Bye.